Hello everybody, thank you for joining us. Today we are going to do a sketch of a person's face and with two different tones. So we are doing a generic face. We'll start off with two ovals side by side and then get to putting down some additional framework. Then what we will do is put each face just at a slight angle and try to see if we can incorporate similar details for each face. So we are really discussing in this exercise how in pop culture illustrations the density of tones that we imply can make a difference in the illustration. So we're just trying to put in elements as close as possible between the two illustrations here, between the two faces, should I say. And yes, they do look more or less the same. And then, not very important, but I guess important to a certain extent, is the structure, the structure of the face that we intend to give this purely generic illustration. Should be again more or less the same, because after all we are comparing, but they do not have to be the exact same thing. Let's say the ear on the other end is not very much visible, so we'll just leave that out. And when I'm mentioning pop culture illustration, the best thing to go about with is a pen rather than a pencil, because it really helps bring out the core details that we are trying to throw in there. So let us just outline everything that we have put in. It's a little tedious, but it's also there's a little payoff to it, because it's like a little more striking when we're using tones of these these type of tones in the imagery, and it just like stands out with a pen more than it will with a pencil. With a pencil, like it'll be more fine, and yes, there will be a certain ground that we will cover, but which will not be as impressionable as when we use a pen. So just quickly going about. And we're trying to maintain this in real time, to show how quickly we can really put together a set of illustrations like these, like generic person's face and the exploration of tones in it. And of course, once we are done with the outset, we can make the images as detailed as we want, but at the moment this much will suffice. Now let us give this guy a hint of an Adam's apple, some neck vein structure and fabric. So some loose, let's say it's a t-shirt, but it's like a little, I don't know, like a little clingy, little loose there. It'll just make for a little extra, we call leeway in terms of tones. So we start with this face, and the only difference is that this will be a denser set of shadows and tones, and this is lighter. And we're using a conventional Sharpie, so light source is from this side in both cases. Now this is quite dense in terms of values that we are throwing in here right now. So perhaps the density I might mention in our routine today is not necessarily comprised of the strokes. The strokes are actually dense, I think, in both illustrations, because we are, after all, utilizing a Sharpie to achieve this. And we're using a fairly thick point. This is the, as I mentioned, the conventional Sharpie. Ideally, we would use a mixture of pens to achieve this. That would be ideal. Lighter pen for crosshatch purposes would do wonders, even for this very, very quickly put together, very generic image. It will really make the illustration come out. And we have other videos in which we discuss how just two different tools or minimal tools can help achieve a certain level of crosshatch excellence. So you can check those out as well if you like. So just trying to go along. This is none of this is actually, there's some forethought in here. We're just mentioning that from the outset, that although there is some forethought in here, but we did not necessarily think of all the little details that we're going to put in either of these illustrations. So we're going to be perhaps improvising on the way as we go. But please do try this at your own pace, and you'll see that it can become a very, very helpful, immensely helpful tool. And then I guess to round it off, we will put denser tones here toward this side of the face, and that is why we wanted to do that crinkly fabric, because it just stands out a little more like this in the darker tones. And then we can do a fade in and show some blending aspects. And then on this guy now, although we're using the same tools, straighten that out a little bit, but we are going to use a greater, denser concentration of tones. So here goes, and you will see how this is going to turn quickly into something else. Now there's some predetermination here, but not really. I just like pick that little spot as we are going along, and I pick that little spot as we're going along. And let's see what we can do now with the rest of the illustration. And you might be wondering that this guy is just putting in all these tones into the nose of all things, and which is a very, 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 very subtle and very, very fine feature of the face. If it gets like wrong in any degree, like the whole illustration might be compromised, and that's absolutely true. But one of the best things about pop culture illustrations is that we have the liberty sometimes of taking shortcuts, just like with oil paint. Oil paint, one of the most messy, but also one of the most flexible mediums out there in terms of redoing things and correcting things, changing things. So with pop culture illustrations, with markers, with pens, there's a little bit of liberty in spite of the fact that we can't really change what we already put down on paper, but we can improvise around it. And one of the tools now being used very much by different artists is a use of a white acrylic to go along with the black markers and pens and tools. That is because those white highlights work wonderfully to help certain details which have been engulfed either in error, or perhaps now it is not being seen as an ideal tone that has been put in. So either way, like it's the white ink becomes very instrumental. Some artists even go to the length of using the correction fluid, but with a lot of finesse that helps them really pop out some details, and it works like wonderfully. And we have used those in different videos, and you could check those out as well, both in some instruction sets and in some like sped up videos on perhaps like different pop culture characters, or so that just putting in some tones right there again and trying to make everything more dense, more concentrated, and more like everything is more hefty going to this side of the face here, like this face here. So I have decided now, as we mentioned, that there's like things on the fly that we're going around, and let's just see what happens here. All of this is going to become encased in shadow. And look at that. So there we have it. It works, and of course you can have your own degrees of how much you want to play around with this, what kind of crosshatch you intend to imply, but excuse me, this works quite like a charm. And I think that although like different, it is essentially the same face, and my preference in this case would be, if I had to like pick one, as a striking illustration, I would say it would be this one. But depending on the purpose, depending on the light, depending on the panels that are being illustrated, you might go with this one. So please do check it out. Essential exercise in pop culture fills and tones. Please do subscribe, keep in touch. Thank you for watching and have yourself a wonderful day.